Hello, and welcome to this JavaScript tutorial series. This series is designed for people who have never even touched or looked at code before to go from nothing to something. I'm not entirely sure how good people will be at the end of this tutorial series, as it will be designed with rewatchability in mind. And every person is different, so some people might get a lot out of this, and some people might get absolutely nothing, for all I know. I haven't created the tutorial series, and I haven't gotten any feedback on it, so I'm not sure how good people will be at the end of it. But within this series, I'll be going through everything you need to know to be able to make a small game entirely from scratch, without using any libraries or fancy languages or anything like that. The only things you will be using within this tutorial is just normal everyday JavaScript and a little bit of HTML. So before we start, let's talk about a few misconceptions people have with coding, for those of you who may not know anything about it right now and have these misconceptions. So the first thing is, you do not need to be good at maths. You do not need to know anything other than primary school level maths, just pluses and minus, divided by, and times. That's pretty much it. And all of that stuff you can do on a calculator anyway. So one common misconception is you need to be good at math. But, as I like to explain, the difference between the math you use when programming and the math people think that you use is sort of like the difference between a student and a teacher in classrooms, like back at school. When you are a programmer, you are the teacher, the guy standing at the front of the room. He doesn't actually have to know the answers to the questions, he just asks the questions. So, what's 1 plus 5? He may not know the answer, and that's you. You don't know what the answer is. And then it's the job of the students to work out that answer and then give it back to you. That's the computer. So you don't have to actually work out your own maths problems, although it does help if you are able to check to see if the answers are right. But like in school, if you've got a good class of students, they'll give you the right answer anyway. Spelling is another thing. You do not have to be good at spelling to be able to code. At all. You don't even need to know how to use English or anything, although, once again, it does help, as always. But the thing with coding is, you have to be consistent. And that's the trick. You don't have to be good at spelling, you just have to be consistent at spelling. So you can spell the word wrong as much as you like, of certain types of words anyway, which I'll be getting into later. But as long as you consistently spell it right, everything will work fine. It doesn't matter that it isn't actually spelled correctly. The next thing is hardware. That entirely depends on what you're coding, but for the purposes of this tutorial, you could be using your phone if you wanted to. You could be using an old laptop from, like, the first days of laptops. It doesn't matter. Programming uses very little amount of hardware, so you don't have to worry about buying a fancy computer or anything like that. You don't need a gaming setup or anything. Unless you're actually creating a game to that level, in which case you probably will, but that's a seriously large amount of code you're going to be doing, so you're not going to be doing that for years to come, sort of thing. At least not from scratch, anyway. Money is the next thing. It does not cost you a single cent to do this, like, at all. Like, all of the programs I'll be using within this tutorial series are completely free ones, which is another misconception thing. The programs do not cost anything. It might do depending on your language, but there's always free alternatives. The program that we'll be using within here is Notepad++, and I'll have a link to that somewhere wherever this video is posted, along with any other programs or things I'll be using, which is pretty much just Notepad++, and Firefox is the browser I use. So the last big misconception thing is JavaScript is not Java. This is a thing that comes up a lot. Everybody thinks that Java is just the shortened down word for JavaScript, but it's not. Java is a completely different language that is pretty far away from JavaScript. So if you're ever Googling around the place, make sure you type in JavaScript or JS, not Java. Otherwise, the results that will come up will not be to do with the same language that you're trying to code in. So, you might be wondering what the end goal of this series will be. The end goal of the tutorial series will be this particle simulation, and it will be using the entire knowledge of everything we learned throughout this series. And it's nice and pleasing on the eyes. So the way this is working is every single one of these little dots on the screen that are all moving around the place, those are all particles. And now following the mouse cursor with a gravitational offset. So what that means is the mouse cursor sort of has a gravitational pull on every single one of the particles. Only the mouse cursor is affecting the particles, and the particles themselves are not affecting themselves, although that is something you could quite easily add on your own after the tutorial series. As you can see, it's a lot of fun to mess around with this thing and just sort of swirl them all around the place. So to accomplish that end goal, this tutorial series will be split into 7 different episodes, as outlined here, not including this intro episode or the actual episode where we'll be making the particle system or this bonus episode. So this is a flowchart, as you can see, of what's in those episodes and how they all connect together. This is sort of just like a dot point of everything that will be outlined within those episodes. Also, all of this stuff is just the most common stuff that I use when coding. If you were to go to an actual course or class or whatever in an actual building where people teach you this stuff, you'll probably find that my course is a whole lot more simplified than their ones. In my experience, other courses flood what you learn with a whole lot of useless junk, pretty much. Just old school ways of how people used to do stuff and less efficient ways of doing stuff and just all of that sort of junk. Where in this tutorial series, I will only be going through things that I actually use pretty much on a day-to-day basis when coding. I'm also designing this tutorial series in a rewatchable sort of a way. I'll be going over a lot of information very quickly, and I don't expect anybody to remember anything on the first playthrough. And there's also a few episodes where I'll have extra information for more advanced stuff, which you're supposed to go back and rewatch after a different episode further down the series. But by having it in an older episode, it just sort of helps keep the whole thing ordered, such as this variable episode. In this variable episode, I'll be going through the basic variables here, and a few more sort of advanced, confusing ones. But then I'll also be going, at the end of the episode, over these more complicated variables, which any new person to program would have absolutely no clue what I'm talking about as I explain this stuff, but it will become clear throughout the later episodes. In parts like that, I will warn the viewers before I continue along with the more advanced things, so you could just stop it and come back to that episode later, or you can try to watch it anyway, but just don't let it confuse you. Because as I keep saying, it is really advanced stuff for brand new people, and I'm not expecting anybody to understand any of it until they go back and watch it from a later episode. So now I'll just do a quick summary of everything that's in these episodes, because as I said, these are just sort of dot points of what I'm doing, and you might not understand what some of these words are until you actually watch the episode, so I'll just do a quick run through and explain a few of these things. So this first episode, page setup, variables, and math. So the first thing we're going to be learning how to do is set up our page so it will run within a browser, because as I said, this is JavaScript, and JavaScript runs within your web browser, and any web browser pretty much, but my preferred web browser is Google Chrome. There will be a link on the page somewhere, wherever this video is, if you haven't already downloaded that. But I prefer Google Chrome as it's more efficient when it comes to JavaScript in my experience. So something that runs really well in Google Chrome might not in something like Firefox and other browsers. But that's up to you to do testing and debugging for all of that stuff. So next we've got variables. Within the variables we'll be learning what a boolean is, integer, a float, a string, what a taken name is, undefined variables, which is a bit of a confusing one, null, and nada, which means not a number. And then within the advanced stuff, arrays, object, pointers, and functions. So if you do know stuff about variables, you might be like, hang on, wait a second, a function isn't a variable, but I sort of count it as one because of some things you can do with it. But this, as I found out, is something that is because this is JavaScript, and JavaScript is an object-based language. But I will not be getting too much into that because I don't have a full understanding of all of that stuff. All I know is object-based stuff such as JavaScript or Python script are really, really easy languages which you can learn in a matter of hours to days, depending on your aptitude for programming. Next we'll be talking about maths, how you can add things together, subtract things, divide things, plus equals, which is adding and assigning, and modulus. In the next episode, statements, syntax, and conditions, we'll be learning about statements, so if, else, and loops, which are for and while. Then we'll be doing syntax, which talks about how the code is laid out, such as what things are. It's just like a question and answer sort of thing about the code. but I can't actually hear your question, so I'm just going to be assuming what people would be asking at that point in time by what I was wondering about at this point when I was originally learning. So stuff about brackets, spacing between words, and case-sensitive stuff. And there's also the use of the semicolon, or the dot dash as I call it, as I keep forgetting its name. Well, most grammar things I forget the name of, so but I'll be explaining that as I talk more about those things within the series. And my naming for things, so people don't get confused. Next we'll be doing conditions. So I have equals, greater than, less than, and, or, not, invert, and brackets for just ordering of things. You'll learn all about that in that episode. So next we have functions. So within that episode we'll be learning about calling a function, returning stuff from a function, inputs, conditions, and local variables. So next after that I go a bit more in depth about how HTML stuff works. You'll be learning what a div is and how to get a div within the code, so converting HTML stuff to JavaScript basically. Button, how to make a button, a text input, a few different things with CSS, although I'm just going to quickly be skimming over that. Canvas, which is what everything's pretty much made in, and messing with a few special canvas options, such as pixelation of stuff. But you'll see more about that in those episodes. Next episode is about the canvas, so learning how to make a line, just a simple line going across the page sort of thing. Clear the line, so you clear the canvas. Drawing a circle, typing letters, loading and saving what's on the canvas, and clipping, which is sort of, it'll only do stuff within a select area. So next we have debugging, which this should be a pretty short episode, but I might ramble about the theory of stuff quite a lot within this episode. So next we have debugging, which I'll be talking about how to log information so you can see what variables are, although I probably would have used this particular function earlier on in the code to output a few things. And there's also alerts and prompts, which are more HTML style stuff, and I pretty much don't use them anymore at all. But they were quite helpful when I was originally learning how to code, so I added these to the tutorials. You'll also learn how to do inner HTML things. That pretty much means outputting JavaScript stuff to HTML. So you can have text display on the screen and things without it being within the canvas. So the next thing we have is theory, which I won't run through these things like I have everything else, as that's pretty much what that episode's going to be, is just me running through what all this stuff means. But I do have a basic sort of area and a more advanced area, but I'll talk more about that in that episode. And then the last episode, or yeah, let's say the last episode, is the particle simulation. So this is where we'll be making it. These are basically the functions that we'll be making to have the output of that particle simulation. And then next I'll have this bonus episode where I'll be talking about more advanced things which I couldn't fit into the particle simulation, such as collisions. Collisions is a thing that pretty much every game has, but I couldn't really fit it into the particle simulation, and to add it to it would add a whole lot more time to the length of that episode, as it will probably take somewhere around an hour to explain and go through all of the code that is required to have a good collision system. So I'm just going to be talking about the theory of that, and you guys can work it out on your own or Google around the place for the solution. With the knowledge you gain after this tutorial series, you should be able to do that quite easily, I hope. So that's it for this intro episode. See you in episode 1.